Alice Riddell. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, firstly, to the conference organizers for accepting my abstract and inviting me to speak today. My name is Alice, and I'm currently in my third year at UCL doing my PhD in anthropology. And I'm going to be talking about Citizen App, which is a live crime and safety tracking app in New York City. I should caveat this presentation by saying that I'm still currently undertaking fieldwork. I flew over from New York yesterday, so these are tentative findings, but I want to share some ethnography and pose some questions that speak to the theme of this conference by looking at the ways that Citizen App accentuates the city as a space of security and by extension insecurity, and how that in turn impacts notions of urban citizenship when surveillance is lateral and often racialized, and questions are raised about who gets to belong where in the city. Firstly, to introduce Citizen, Citizen App is a live crime and safety tracking app that is operational in 60 different cities in the US and boasts 10 million active users as of 2021, 2 million of which are reportedly in New York City. Citizen is self-described as a personal safety network in which the public safety system is opened and AI is used to monitor police scanners for 911 calls that are relevant to public safety. Citizen also utilizes user-recorded footage as users near a crime, fire, or accident are encouraged to go live and film the unfolding events. In addition, users can also self-report incidences if they see something they deem to be of concern in their area. Other users are then notified of this information via alerts, warnings of potentially dangerous situations happening around their physical location, as Citizen also functions as a map of the city, utilizing geo-awareness technology. As situations unfold, more information floods in from user comments, further video clips, and uploaded police scanner recordings. Emojis expressing shock, anger, and hope bubble up across the screen as incidences unravel. It is in this sharing of information across a digital network that Citizen functions as both a form of social media and a peer-to-peer surveillance app. I chose to conduct my research in New York City as I've lived there before, so it's a place I'm familiar with, and also as it functioned as the pilot city and for a time the headquarters of Citizen. Methodologically, I've so far conducted 60 interviews, one focus group, and have undertaken participant observation at numerous community events and mutual aid events. I have been predominantly working in Bushwick and Bed-Stuy, increasingly gentrified neighborhoods in Brooklyn, with interlocutors mainly from the arts and activism scene. As you can see from the images on the slide, this is a neighborhood that is generally quite skeptical and critical of law enforcement and the current carceral system. And often my interlocutors will warn one another of police presence at subway stops on Instagram. Safety and security have always been a main concern for urban dwellers, from the castle lookout to the department store guard. Security is by nature spatial. It's driven by concerns of boundaries and access, contesting and negotiating potential threats. Spaces of security are deeply affected by the surrounding infrastructures and technologies in operation, and the role of imagination and affect play heavily in designated who is allowed where. The city is already a space of security and surveillance as CCTV cameras loom over street corners and police officers patrol the sidewalks. Citizen exists as a form of lateral surveillance, in the name of safety and through the language of empowerment, in which community members and neighbors are encouraged to report on one another. Today, I'm arguing that Citizen App accentuates the city as a space of security as it reshapes certain users' perception of their neighborhoods through a lens of fear and mistrust. And when the streets and parks become contested spaces, this in turn has consequences for urban citizenship. Who gets to fully participate in all expressions of urban life? Who gets to walk down the street in their neighborhood without fear of accusation, arrest, or of being recorded? I also want to note here that Citizen is used for a variety of reasons and by a wide-ranging demographic. Many people who use the app often don't ever post information on the app. Some of my interlocutors have described using Citizen for comedic value and trolling. Others have stated how Citizen helped them track COVID cases during lockdown. And others have described their experience of using Citizen with neutrality and indifference. This speaks to the inherent ambivalence of digital technology. As Miller and Horst argue, quote, Often what we adjudicate as its good and bad implications are inseparable consequences of the same developments, end quote. In addition, ambivalent attitudes are particularly susceptible to transient information, like those transmitted from an app, which is updated in real time. Therefore, it's pertinent to keep in mind that users' opinions or feelings about Citizen oscillate both over time and through the different ways that they use the app. That being said, many of my interlocutors have described feelings of anxiety and insecurity resulting from their use of Citizen. As Tracy, a 27-year-old TV producer living in Bushwick, told me, quote, "Citizen made me feel more on edge. I felt weird about my surroundings, and it made me feel more unsafe than I normally would. I felt like it was making me paranoid in a way that I didn't need to be," end quote. This feeling of insecurity resulted in Tracy deleting Citizen altogether. Other interlocutors have also taken similar steps. Eva, a Latinx furniture designer who's lived in Bushwick since 2017, told me, quote, "This app really was created to scare citizens. I think almost all of my friends who had downloaded it have now deleted it, and we all have negative discourse towards it," end quote. However, not everyone who feels this sense of fear and discomfort chose to delete the app. As Jenny, a 25-year-old white native New Yorker, told me, quote, "It's an anxiety-causing app that gives you too much information about the horrible things that happen in your city. I have notifications on, and that's not a good idea. Most of the time I open it and it ends with me closing it again in horror, which I guess is it doing its job," end quote. Citizen notifications function as a continual reminder of your potential insecurity, jarringly interrupting one's day wherever you happen to be it at work, on the subway, or at home in your bedroom, blurring the boundaries between public and private. Thanks to geolocation awareness and digital cartography, crime, or at least the perception of crime, becomes ever present. Apps with maps are powerful, making users feel small yet significant, creating reference points of relation with the self always at center. Citizen works to create an overwhelming map of your area that gives the impression that your neighborhood is constantly under siege, and therefore a space to be mistrustful of. When this happens and you begin to think of your neighborhood as insecure, this can result in a change in everyday behavior and how you move around the city. This was the case for Sanvi, who moved to Bushwick last year with her black Labrador, Paw Paw, who needs walking multiple times a day. And this is Paw Paw. I first met Sanvi while I was volunteering at a community space in Bushwick, and her apartment was directly above the space. She explained to me how Citizen had totally reshaped her evening routine and how she moves around her neighborhood with Paw Paw. Sanvi downloaded Citizen when she first moved to the city and was living alone for the first time. However, she decided to turn off notifications as her friends had mentioned that they made them feel paranoid. Rather, Sanvi would check the app before she would walk Paw Paw, quote, as a safety net to make sure there hadn't just been a shooting on her block, end quote. She also expressed that normally she felt safe and secure having Paw Paw walking with her as she walked around at night as a petite woman. However, one evening, after returning from a walk at around 10 p.m., she decided to check Citizen and saw 3 separate notifications from the past 10 minutes, which included an armed robbery, an armed mugging, and an armed assault all around her block. She exclaimed, "That was really uncomfortably close, so I made a rule that I don't take Paw Paw out past 8 p.m. if I can help it. I always check Citizen beforehand, and I always carry pepper spray with me when I do in my hand," end quote. Firstly, it's important to note that Sanvi wasn't able to find confirmation that any or all of these incidences had indeed happened. However, she put stringent restrictions on her evening routine nonetheless. While it is of course sensible to be situationally aware when walking around a city at night, Sanvi's use of Citizen redirected her everyday practice of walking her dog and transformed it into an activity filled with trepidation, in which she's conscious of timings and is also now armed as she navigates her way through the blocks surrounding her apartment. This sense of unease and fear about one's neighborhood due to Citizen is a common experience among my interlocutors. Drew, a 28-year-old white musician who has lived in Bushwick for 7 years and has deleted and re-downloaded Citizen app at least 10 times. Often his reason for deleting the app is the feeling of unsafety it gave him about his neighborhood. He explained, quote, "In my neighborhood, I felt more paranoid and on guard when I was using it. Normally, I'm pretty trusting of my surroundings, but with Citizen, I'm constantly thinking, what's that guy doing over there?" End quote. This feeling expressed by Drew, a self-professed gentrifier, can have much wider consequences. Marisol is a 29-year-old second-generation Puerto Rican immigrant who lives in Bed-Stuy. She describes Citizen as gentrification 101. I asked her to expand, and she explained, "We've seen so many times that gentrification brings out police violence into communities. A few years ago, there was a guy in Bed-Stuy that was known within the community and known to have mental health issues. One day he was having a mental health break, and a woman called the cops on him, and they shot him, and he died. And this woman was a gentrifier who came in and didn't understand his part in the community. It worries me that gentrifiers will come in and be constantly checking Citizen, which can lead to calling the cops, which isn't always the safest option. Citizen makes people feel unsafe, when they are probably a lot safer than they perceive, and I worry what they will do out of response to that," end quote. Citizen is asking its users to make time-sensitive moral judgments about who does and doesn't belong, and there is a danger that these judgments can result in racial profiling. As Brian Jefferson in his book Digitize and Punish states, quote, "Racialized surveillance and punishment have found their way into our personal electronic devices," end quote, and Citizen is no exception. Citizen has often been charged with accusations of racism and discrimination. Many of my interlocutors have pointed to the pervasivity of racist comments on the app, including accusatory comments directed at people of color. Cyrus, a Black queer nightlife entertainer, said in regards to Citizen, quote, "It's snitching. Crime is a part of human existence, especially in an urban environment, and sometimes it's necessary for survival. We can all pretend there's not oppressive behavior actively coming down on us, but there is, and we're all going to do little things here and there to survive. Why make it easier for them to get us?" End quote. So what are the implications of Citizen app in gentrifying neighborhoods, which are already subjected to increased policing? Especially when considering that over-policed, gentrified areas result in displacement, as more people of color are incarcerated, which in turn further destabilizes communities. It is also important to think of this in the context of the US. As Joseph Maska writes in The Theater of Operations, post 9/11, the amplification of terror and fear was utilized as a justification for the US security apparatus we see today. Fear is at the heart of it as a standardization of danger, and the continuous campaign to normalize imminent threats results in a national state of perpetual anxiety and mistrust. The Copenhagen School defined this as securitization, a process of constructing a collective fear of an existential threat to society in which security is positioned as an everyday lived experience. This in turn tailors an atmosphere of fear, which is used to legitimize technological surveillance practices to protect citizens from both real and imagined threats. Fear becomes normative, as it is established as a fact of social reality and positions security as something we constantly engage in. This in turn works to reaffirm any sense of disorder and our need for protection, as insecurity begets insecurity. Thus, in urban spaces, Citizen functions as a portable and continuous security apparatus and practice, and one that plays on Americans' fears and negative imaginaries of the other. However, with Citizen, rather than a remote or abstract danger, it is the user's very neighbors and community members who are positioned as the imagined other and the potential threat. The terms imagined and potential are of significance here. Jenny, mentioned earlier, expressed concerns about the reliability of Citizen and how this gave her a skewed perspective of her neighborhood. She said, quote, "The app makes it seem like we live in a very crime-riddled neighborhood. I'll have a notification that 0.3 miles away, someone was stabbed, and then we walk the dog and see nothing is wrong out here. It makes it seem a lot worse than it seems to me just being around the neighborhood," end quote. That being said, it is not just Citizen that is responsible for this heightened perception of crime, as crime is currently being over-reported in other forms of media, like the local evening news, or on social medias like Facebook and Instagram. In general, the perception of crime is disproportionate to actual crime rates, and Citizen adds to this impression in a way that is invasive via notifications and ever-present, as your phone is ever-present as you move around the city. Before deleting the app, Eva, also mentioned earlier, used Citizen to useful effect during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, to catch up with protests or to find the location of subway stops without a police presence. However, she also said Citizen was really overwhelming during this time, as there were constant shootings popping up hour upon hour in specific neighborhoods such as Bushwick, as opposed to the more affluent neighborhoods in Brooklyn like Williamsburg. Confused and concerned, Eva started going to the locations of the alerts to see what was really happening. She exclaimed, quote, "I was just so angry and I wanted to see for myself, so I started going to the locations, and every time no one was there, never even any blood. So it was incorrect, and it was misleading you to think that certain areas of Brooklyn were more dangerous or having a higher crime rate during that time. It made me think, who is posting this? Are they trying to move people around? Are they trying to create a divide between people? Ultimately, it was just creating fear, end quote. Due to Citizen's self-reporting feature, which it reinstated at the beginning of this year, it is difficult to ascertain the accuracy of all notifications, and often notifications will say unconfirmed or unfounded report. As you can see in this slide, the notification changed an hour later to updated to unfounded report, which is a fairly long amount of time for the situation to be updated. These are some more unconfirmed notifications I've received. And frequently in the cases of shooting reports, Citizen posts that ShotSpotter technology has detected gunshots, while emphasizing how that technology can also pick up fireworks or cars backfiring. ShotSpotter is an audio surveillance technology that is utilized by the NYPD, in which hundreds of small sensors have been deployed on rooftops and on lampposts across areas of Brooklyn that are deemed high in gun violence. The fact that Citizen also uses this technology raises questions about their relationship to local law enforcement, and more broadly, the ways in which power is negotiated between state actors, private enterprise, and individual citizens. And this also speaks to something Alison mentioned about the revolving door. The ex-NYPD Police Commissioner Bill Bratton now is head of communications at Citizen. And so these questions are also particularly pertinent in communities with a self-professed skepticism of the police, like Bushwick and Bed-Stuy. Citizen exists against a backdrop of competing personalized and privatized digital security apparatus, from Amazon's Ring, which connects Wi-Fi-enabled products like video doorbells, to its social media app Neighbors, where neighbors can post and comment on suspicious activity from their front door, to another app called Nextdoor, a social media neighborhood app where users can buy used furniture and share recipes, whilst also warning other users of suspect behavior, which can also result in racial profiling. Just 2 weekends ago, the New York Times ran a story about the community fallout on the app Nextdoor, in a self-described liberal progressive neighborhood in Brooklyn called Park Slope. A white woman whose dog had been killed by a black, mentally unwell, unhoused man in their local park was calling for his arrest and for him to be removed from the community by the community on the app Nextdoor. This resulted in backlash and debate about systemic racism, vigilantism, and policing, with community members posting about the negative impact of an arrest on a vulnerable and unstable person of color. The matter remains unresolved, but raises the same questions my research is attempting to grapple with. What are the consequences of apps like Nextdoor and Citizen, which work to normalize lateral neighborhood surveillance, while stoking fears about one's community and bringing into question who does and doesn't belong, and as such, bringing certain parts of the community together while further marginalizing others? Citizen was not always named as such. When the app first launched in 2016, it was called Vigilante and was swiftly removed from the Apple Store for obvious reasons. Just a few months later, the app rebranded and relaunched as Citizen, although the majority of its features remained the same. The term citizen stirs up nationalistic mythology of the patriotic hero, the law-abiding citizen, proud and duty-bound. Citizen is both a personal call to action and an inclusion in something bigger, a community of like-minded, concerned citizens. Citizen and American lyric, Claudia Rankine's award-winning poetry collection sketches an impactful portrait of everyday racism in America, asking who gets to count as a citizen. Citizen, the app, creates similar questions. When neighborhoods and community spaces are imbued with insecurity, fear, and suspicion, what are the implications of community-reported crimes for vulnerable people and people of color? Who gets to fully participate in urban life without being designated as hypervisible and suspicious in their own neighborhoods? And ultimately, who gets to count as an urban citizen? Thank you.
Thank you for this very interesting and very frightening talk. Do we have questions?